Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. So the real estate market and what's going on has got to be, after maybe the pandemic and maybe January 6th, the topic du jour that lots of people are interested in. And so I thought we'd reach out to Tim Hudak. He is the CEO of the Ontario Real Estate Association. You probably know him best because he spent, 25 years in the Ontario legislature, 5 as leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
You've done your research there, Brian. Exactly. 5 as leader, 21 years elected from the Niagara and Hamilton area. Love the public service, but I did my 21-year sentence and they eventually let me out for good behavior.
And now you've been for 5 years president of the Ontario Real Estate Association.
Yeah, so I have the honor of serving as CEO of the Ontario Real Estate Association. I retired from politics to take on that job. So I work for the almost 85,000 realtors now, whether they're in Mississauga or in Thunder Bay or Ottawa across our province, of realtors who are helping buyers and sellers in the marketplace every day. And I was really motivated, Brian, because when I was in politics, I found home ownership a real driving issue. I believe in home ownership. I believe in the importance of housing. I know it changed me when I bought my first home. And if we want to have strong communities across Peel in our province, we need a greater ability to afford that Canadian dream of home ownership. So that's kind of what I do every day.
So I got to ask you, the website logo that you've got is Keep the Dream Alive.
Yeah.
Right now, a lot of people don't believe the dream of home ownership is alive. What's gone wrong and what can we do?
It is slipping away for far too many people who have played by the rules. They did what they were told. They worked hard, they got a degree, they got a job, they're saving every penny that they can. But that dream of owning a home and getting the keys to your first place is slipping further away. And it's a real betrayal of what we've been promised as Canadians. Brian, I think you probably know this, but ever since the earliest days of Canada, from Confederation on, the rate of homeownership increased. Even during the Depression, the wars, the inflation of the 70s and such, you had a better shot at owning a home than your parents and grandparents. It was a great part of the Canadian dream. And what did that mean? Well, when you own a home, you tend to invest in it. It does prove to be a good investment over time. And besides, you can't raise a family in a stock or a bond. Very importantly, it's a place of our fondest memories where we can be ourselves, where we can be most comfortable and relaxed, and during COVID, safe. And it's also been demonstrated time and time again that children of homeowners, income's constant between homeowners and renters. Children of homeowners tend to do better in school, better health outcomes. They get better jobs. It's just good for our social fabric. But since 2012, that upward curve I told you about on homeownership started going the other direction. The reason? We had a lot of demand for housing. People believe in it. We were not building enough homes. And now it has become a cruel game of musical chairs where a lot more people are circling fewer and fewer homes.
Why aren't we building enough homes? We've got, I think it's over 400,000 immigrants coming into Canada in the next year. We've got the Greater Toronto Area that's going to double or almost double in size in the next 20 to 30 years. We've got supposedly the population the size of Montreal moving to Toronto in the next 10 years. We've got lots of land. Why aren't we building more homes?
We have lots of land. We've got lots of demand. The homes will sell like that. Basically, we threw over time more and more red tape on the back of builders. We threw more and more processes in the way to now it takes up to 10 years to do a subdivision in our province. And every month the costs get higher and higher through housing inflation. We've not focused on it at a provincial or municipal level. And we've seen the rise of nimbyism, empowered by social media, the not in my backyard NIMBYs who fight housing development. We should be building about 100,000 homes per year to catch up with population growth and immigration. And as we were as low as 50 or 60,000 in the previous decades. Good news is we're getting closer to that. But for many, many years, about 20 years, we let red tape, politics get in the way of building the kinds of homes that people need. And now we're paying the price.
Why do these municipalities put in so much red tape?
I think there's a habit in government, whether it's at municipal level, provincial or federal, where you put in a new rule or law that might make sense over time, and then you never change it. So let me give you a couple of examples for our urban areas. We have parking rules that if you build a building, say a condominium, you have to have so many parking spots. That was built in the day for the 1970s when, cars are more frequent and transit was less optimal. But does that make sense today if you're building along a subway line or a LRT line in Mississauga? When some of the parking spots never get sold, they drive up prices considerably and push projects out of reach. So there's an example of rules that were put in the 70s and 80s that don't necessarily make sense for 2022 and beyond. Here's another one. So, your listeners and viewers can picture that wartime bungalow, whether it's in Brampton or whether it's in St. Catharines, and it's some wear and tear. So if the owner decided, I'm going to tear that bungalow down, I'm going to build a 4-story monster home. And you see a lot of that happening, and that's their right. They're the property owner. We believe in home ownership and property. That's their right. But Ryan, if they want to go the other way and say, I'm going to tear that housing down and I'm going to build a duplex or a townhome or a triplex that could be affordable for 3 or 4 starter families, new families, they go through this red tape ringer. They get called before the committee of adjustment or to the city. The NIMBY say, we don't want that type of housing in our neighborhood. We don't want new people. We're happy the way it is. And then the homeowner says, well, the heck with it. It's going to cost me a fortune and years of delay. And they walk away. And who pays the price? It's those 3 or 4 families that can't get an affordable home. There's an example of red tape. It gets in the way. We call it exclusionary zoning. Our view, level playing field. If that homeowner wanted to turn the bungalow into a bigger house for them, great. But if they want to turn to 3 or 4 units for some other families, they should be allowed to do so.
We're chatting with Tim Hudak tonight. He is the president of the Ontario Real Estate Association. We're talking about the housing crisis, frankly, I think it is. And the website that the Ontario Real Estate Association has that's called Keep the Dream Alive, which, we're not sure is alive today. We're going to take a break for some messages and come back more with Mr. Hudak in just a minute. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. It's a real pleasure of mine tonight to be interviewing Tim Hudak, who is the CEO of the Ontario Real Estate Association. He has got, as undoubtedly lots of us know, really quite an impressive resume. He was for 21 years in the provincial government in the legislature of Ontario. He served as Minister of Culture, Tourism and Recreation. He was Minister of Consumer and Business Services. He was also a Minister of Northern Development and Mines. So he's really had quite wide experience at the provincial leadership level, and then ran for and became leader of the Ontario Progressive Conservative Party and did that for 5 years. He's got both a master's degree in economics from the University of Washington, as well as a BA in economics from University of Western Ontario. He is vice chair of the Robert Land Academy. He is on the National Council for the C.D. Howe Institute, and he's also on the parent council for Loretto Abbey Catholic Secondary School. And you really have had quite an influence on Ontario. And so thank you for your role in that, and congratulations. And now I think you're having an even greater role potentially in keeping that dream alive. Tim, I've got kids in my 20s and 30s and live in Mississauga. They are looking at either a 500 square foot condo downtown Toronto or moving to Georgetown or farther afield. Yeah. If they can afford a house, and they do well. I've done okay, but still, housing affordability in 416/905 is just not there today, and it ended up being, as you undoubtedly know, one of the major issues in the last municipal election. In the last federal election, Jagmeet Singh was asked a question specifically in the leadership debate about housing ownership, and he actually, I think, expressed the true problem, which is, he said some people like current pricing because they got a lot of net worth built up in that house, but other people don't like it because they're never going to be able to buy. And there's been a couple of books that have come out recently that said this is one of the biggest generational divides in history between those that own and those that don't own, and that it could lead to populism and issues and really argument /fight /issues between generations.
True.
We've got this government bureaucracy that's built up over time, and you did a good job of listing two of the examples of things that just don't make sense. But is that enough? What can we do to bring housing affordability down, but at the same time, not destroy the net worth of all the people that are in their 50s, 60s, 70s that have spent a lifetime building up that net worth?
What we really need, and thank you, Brian outlined the challenges really well, and I wish your kids all the best. I mean, when you and I were growing up, you always thought you could buy a home in the neighborhood you grew up in, and that was, what it was meant to be Canadian, and that is slipping away for the next generation, and it's tragic. But I'm not going to give up, and in fact, the Ford government, to their credit, and Minister Steve Clark, the housing minister, took a number of our ideas. You mentioned the Keep the Dream Alive campaign, 8 out of 10 actually. They put them into legislation called the More Homes, More Choice Act in 2018. And we are actually now starting to see some positive results of knocking down some of that red tape that I mentioned. We had the biggest increase in housing supply in more than 20 years in 2020, and it looks like 2021 is going to beat it. That having said, we're climbing out of a hole, but at least we're starting to climb out of it. So do more of the same. Let me give you a couple of examples on the supply side, and then some suggestions for our sons and daughters generation. We should be building up also around our major transit lines. If we're investing rightly billions of dollars into subways and LRTs, bus rapid transit, why in some areas do we only have 1 or 2 story homes around that? Why wouldn't we intensify and build up in those areas? We can build above subway and GO stations. They started to do that. A lot of people, young people, might like that for their first home. They can hop on the subway and not have to worry about packing the boots and the coat. But we also have to have a balance in housing where we're going to have more single family homes as well. So you need it across the spectrum. Here's another suggestion. Every year governments have an infrastructure program they announce in their budget: water, sewer, roads, whatever. How about this? If Mississauga or Burlington or Fort Erie play ball and start focusing on building more homes that people can afford, they get rewarded for it. They go to the top of the line, right? There's something that aligns the incentives to welcome growth. And those that don't play ball, that say, no, we don't want these people to live in our community, we don't care if they move out, well, they should pay a price for that and not get access to funds for other projects. My last comment too on helping to buy. The biggest challenge for people today, we hear from our realtor members, is not really the mortgage payments. They can get the mortgage paid. It's the money for the down payment and saving up for that. So there are some mechanisms that are available now. If we get rid of some of the outdated laws, it will help. For example, there's patient money through pensions that are interested in helping people buy a home. And just like the old rent-to-own programs, you pay that back over time, or when you sell your home, they get part of the upside. But right now we have some outdated rules that mitigate against that. Also allow for co-owning homes. There are modern solutions to help with the down payment as well. So we need to focus on that as well as increasing housing supply.
Let me ask you a couple specific questions, if I could, about policy suggestions that some people have made. Some people have been very critical of this blind bidding process. Could you explain what it is and what the issue is, and what do you think, if anything, should be done about it?
Yeah, well, provincial laws dictate that when you make an offer on a home, that information cannot be shared with anybody else aside from the homeowner. And the reason for that is to protect people's privacy. A lot of personal information is there: how much you can afford for the down payment. Is there going to be a condition on selling your own home, for example? When can you make the payments, a closing date, et cetera. So you're not allowed to share that. So if there are more people that are looking to buy a home, you don't know what the people are bidding. Some people call that blind bidding, but it's the traditional offer process. It's done that way to protect individuals' privacy. The other option exists in some countries. It exists in Ontario, it's just not chosen, and that's an auction. So in Australia and New Zealand, for example, you know what everybody else is bidding.
I understand they actually get together on the front lawn.
I know it's hard to imagine that happening right in a neighborhood here, but Australia, they do that. You're right. They got an auctioneer, and then through COVID, it moved online. So you could have the auctioneer on your front lawn, or it could be online. I don't know if I'd be comfortable about that. Everybody's saying, oh, Hudak is smoking too many cigars in his basement, the house stinks. And it does have some scams where they have fake bidders to drive up the price. That's the problem they have there. But what tends to happen in an auction is you get auction fever, and the bids go even higher. So we've seen actually rapid accelerating prices in New Zealand and Australia, driven by auctions, and more homes are going by auctions. Our point of view is, look, it's your home, Brian. You've bought it. You're going to depend on the sale of your home to get another home or for retirement or whatever. You should be in the driver's seat. You should decide. If you want to go the auction route, you should be able to do so. If you want to go to the traditional offer process, you should do so. Governments should not force that choice on what is somebody's most precious and expensive asset.
Okay, and I guess the counter to that is some people believe that what ends up happening, particularly in a seller's market, is that the buyer's not knowing what the last price is dramatically overbid. And a lot of people that got their mortgages approved for a certain price, the asking price, are just bid out of the market.
It can happen. And that's why you should work with a realtor who will give you the best advice so you don't overbid, who will know the market and the neighborhood. But the phenomenon that happens on the auction sides is then you have a series of increments. It's not just one round. It goes on forever until somebody finally wins. So if you know somebody bid, 5,000 more than you, then you do 6,000 and 7,000 and it accelerates. So when you look at some of the academic research on real estate auctions, it does tend to drive up prices even higher than the traditional offer process.
Really, that's interesting. I hadn't heard that recently. Okay, what about foreign buyers and their influence on the market and taxes that people are recommending for that and or vacant home taxes?
Yeah, so government's reviewing all of that now. Municipalities can do a vacant home tax. I guess it depends if how many homes are actually like that in a province. It did it in BC and we're watching it. When it comes to foreign buyers, I know that's very politically popular, especially if they're not going to be living here. We did convince the Ontario government now to track the number of foreign buyers and to publish a percent every year. And recently it's been about 3 or 4% of the market. So not a large piece, but it's certainly a tool available if it starts getting to higher and higher ratios. There's nothing that makes an Ontario realtor happier than when they can hand the keys to a new home over to those Canadians who played by the rules and worked hard. A big area we're focused on in this area, though, is dirty money coming into our province, money laundering. And Canadian real estate is a prime target for money coming in from corrupt overseas officials or criminal organizations. And what they do, Brian, is they buy a property, but they don't say it's Pablo Escobar's, nephew that bought the property. They hide behind numbered companies. And so you don't know who the owner is. We think we need to lift the veils so it's perfectly transparent. You know who the owners are. It's a publicly searchable database, and you can match somebody who may have been a drug lord living in South America. This is a major problem. BC has put a registry to enable this. We want to see one in Ontario as well. We don't want to see one parcel of land go to the hands of a relative of a drug lord or a corrupt overseas official that should be going to a law-abiding Canadian.
What about, I think some think tank on the West Coast recommended a surtax for homes above $1 million.
Yeah, you can't tax your way to affordability. I think that is just a tax grab, and I do worry about it. Look, a home is one of the very few things, and if you can think of another, tell me, where you pay a tax when you buy it. You've got the land transfer tax, and it's double if you're a listener in Toronto. And then every year you pay more tax on it through your property taxes. Is there anything else that you buy where you pay an annual tax? All right, so houses have a lot of tax already. Putting another tax on top of that on your savings is the wrong thing to do. It'll hurt our economy, and it will be a betrayal of the promise we've made to Canadians for generations that they can count on the sale of their home for their retirement. We don't want to see governments taxing that away. We worry about that a lot. And these issues we just talked about, some we've studied more, some may work, and this one is a non-starter. It'll be an atom bomb on the savings of the middle class. We can't forget, though, this is all caused because we don't have enough supply. Anything else is fiddling on the margins. Anything else is making a minor difference. If we truly want to make more homeowners in a province, we need more starter homes. And we need more move-up homes when the kids come along. That's the biggest area, and more rentals, actually. Those are the 3 biggest areas for focus. And any energy government spend outside of supply is not going to solve the long-term problem.
So you mentioned nimbyism and bureaucracy. I've had some people on my show that tell me that the biggest challenge is that local municipalities are nowhere close to the housing density that Ontario provincial official plans, places to grow legislation, whatever it's called, would suggest they should have. And so they're just not approving development nearly as quickly or as dense as our population requires. What do you think of that?
It's absolutely true. Look, we need a broad-based solution, but part of that is going to be for our major urban centers will be intensification, more homes that people can't afford, particularly along major transit lines. It only makes sense. But what we have happening is the NIMBY forces gather and a small group of neighbors will then stop housing that could, be suitable for 500, 600, 700 people. And we've run out of time. We've seen the results with frustrated buyers. We've seen skyrocketing prices. We urgently need more housing supply to fight this affordability crisis. Here's one more thing, and your viewers can see it at aria.com and your listeners too. We did a recent survey of people 45 and under, and we found, Brian, that over half of them were searching in other provinces for real estate. Now with the ability to work from home, we could face a loss of that next generation, next job creators, next entrepreneurs, purely based on housing. So in that kind of threat, should a handful of neighbors through nimbyism be denying houses for people who are just trying to get a foot on the ladder? Should they be able to deny that talent staying in our province? We think the time has come for more aggressive measures to bring in more housing that people can afford, whether that's a tall condo or the detached home where they want to raise their family.
I had Joe Barrage, principal of urban strategies, one of the foremost sort of city planners around, on my show. And he said, the problem isn't NIMBYism. He said, NIMBYism makes sense. The problem is town councilors, city councilors that aren't acting like adults, that play to that NIMBYism because they want to get elected rather than doing what's the right thing for their community long-term, and being as worried about the future and future residents as they are about the current voters. And he said the only solution is to not have them elected by wards, but have them elected citywide. So they start thinking about things on a citywide basis. It's our governance system and the incentive system that we create for our local town and city council representatives. What do you think of that?
And Joe's got a good point, and I totally get it. I was 21 years in politics. I wasn't at the municipal level, but I worked with a lot of municipal politicians, and many of them are hardwired to respond to existing voters to the expense of future voters. So they get on side with NIMBY and fight projects, even if they know it's the right thing. So what do you need to do about that? Well, Joe has one solution, and that may happen. I also think that you need to reward municipalities. I mentioned this earlier on. So the incentives line up with increasing housing and affordability. So yeah, they could fight the local project, but if a municipality doesn't hit a certain target, they don't get money for the new arena or the water and sewer project or what have you. So you'd have that broader incentive for municipalities as a whole to line up with getting more housing that people can afford at the end of the day. And my last point on the councillor side as well, there should also be, there's the body that looks over the land tribunal over these decisions. If protests are brought against housing developments, you can't blame people, you have the right to fight, but if they're frivolous, vexatious, just driving up prices, you don't follow the rules, too much mischief, the land tribunal should have an ability just to make those projects happen and make quicker decisions, because we need to move on and getting more housing supply in the market.
I understand that we've had more, I think they're called ministerial zoning agreements than ever before, where the minister of housing is actually sort of coming in on top of the city councils, on top of the land tribunals, and saying what the zoning should be. Is that a good move or a bad move?
Good. You need to have that authority. So I think in any kind of crisis situation, you're going to need carrots and sticks. And I've talked about some of the carrots, but rewarding municipalities that bring in more housing supply that the average family can buy. On the other hand, you do need some sticks, and a ministerial zoning order would enable it enables the Minister of Municipal Affairs to rezone a project for more housing or for job creators. And what it does there, Brian, is it speeds up a process that could take many, many years, 6, 7, 8 years in some circumstances, and make it happen in 1 or 2. That means more homes come earlier that people can afford, or we keep that job creator who may have otherwise, headed to the States. Now, the way this minister has done it, he's made sure municipalities have been inside. I don't think he's done any that the local municipality objected to. I could be corrected if I'm wrong, but I believe they usually line that municipality. So they're getting good projects done faster, and they're avoiding a lot of the red tape process. So we need more tools like this, given we're in an affordability crisis.
Toronto is almost out of land. Mississauga is almost out of land. And so therefore, if we're going to build more housing, that's going to be multifamily. But not everyone wants to live in a multifamily residence. Lots of people want to have that dream of a single family home. The Ford government recently came out and recommended the construction of Highway 413 and the Bradford bypass. I've seen plans that suggest that Caledon could go from 50,000 to 500,000, that Halton Hills has a comparable kind of increase. And if you don't build the highways, I don't know how those people are going to get down the 400 or the 410 or the 401 to their jobs. But if you do build those highways, some people think that you're paving over good farmland. What do you think about that issue?
We need to increase our transportation routes, whether that's going to be on subways, GO Transit, and highways. So we are big supporters of the 413. We like to see other highway investments as well, because people actually do want to have a home they can afford, and that's going to open up new areas. You can always do this by protecting the most sensitive land. You can do so with legislation like the Green Belt, but we need to have access to new properties that will ensure that the middle class dream of owning your own home is going to stay within reach. We have a growing population. You mentioned earlier the number of immigrants who want to call Ontario home. That's a good thing. It shows that we're attractive across the world for talent. But honest to goodness, if we don't find places for them to live, it's going to drive prices even further through the roof, and we'll lose that talent. These decisions are long overdue. So let's get on with it.
Can I ask you to back up for a second? I've been involved in the beer industry, in the entertainment industry, in the pharmaceutical industry, and in the real estate industry. All are regulated to a certain extent. And one would have thought, I guess, that the real estate industry is the most free enterprise, the most capitalist, the most, anyone can get involved and become a builder or a developer. But with what you've described and what I've experienced, there's more government involvement in the real estate industry where, planners think that they can tell you what the building facade should look like, how many parking spots are there, how high it can be, how wide it can be, how much it has to be set back, how many windows there are. Why have we created a society where there are far more governmental regulation influences on the product in real estate than there is on a drug, a vaccine?
Geez, that's a good question. but you're right. It is highly regulated. And, the habit in governments is once you have a rule, it's pretty hard to kill it. And then they start piling up on each other, kind of like barnacles on the side of a boat, right? How did it get that way? Geez, I don't know. I guess because every level of government is involved. Municipalities play the role in zoning, for example. The province regulates the housing sector. There are rules for builders, and we have a regulator for the real estate agents, for the realtors in our province, to make sure they're ethical, and there's disciplinary hearings and education and such. And then the national government plays a role in immigration, and as well, allocating resources for infrastructure projects. So I guess because so many governments have been involved over time, not working well together, and the rules just have piled up. And it's demonstrated by the lack of housing we were building for nearly 2 decades. It was falling farther and farther behind the number of people who wanted it.
We're chatting tonight with Tim Hudak. He is the president of the Ontario Real Estate Association. He's the former leader of the Ontario Progressive Conservative Party. We're going to have to say goodbye to him. But Tim, can I ask you one last question? You don't have to answer it if you're not allowed to these days. But who do you think is going to be Premier of Ontario at the end of this year? Who's going to be Prime Minister of Canada?
Oh man, so you're putting my old hat on, or my old radio hat, eh? Well, we got the election coming in June, and I work with all the political parties, so I've got to be very careful about telling folks how to vote. What we do at the Real Estate Association, though, is we do rate their platforms. So who's going to be most, pro home ownership, who's going to be most pro rental. So you can see that stuff at aria.com. Look at the national level. I think that the Prime Minister is probably best positioned right now. I've been in politics for a long time. It's never good when you see parties fighting internally. You got to look at those across the floor. So as long as the Conservatives continue to fight among themselves, I think that paves the way quite well for the Prime Minister to stay in office.
Good political answer. Thank you. It's interesting. I think one of the things that is going to come up in the next year is fiscal prudence. We've increased our debt dramatically because of the pandemic and spending associated with it. And you were one of the only people that I remember in the recent past that have really focused on fiscal prudency. And I congratulate you for what you did in that regard. I'm not necessarily as socially conservative as you. I'm more of a social progressive, but I'm a fiscal conservative, and I think that this is going to be the issue. And so therefore, people like you are going to be needed in public life to be talking about what we're going to do with these debts and deficits, and are they going to be able to continue? So I congratulate you and thank you for the role that you've played in the past, and hope that you play that role in the future as well. And thank you for keeping the dream alive for homeowners.
Brian, I really appreciate that. And thank you for your interest and the really good questions that you asked me. And I like your work in Saga 960. Keep it up, and I'd love to come back sometime.
Thanks so much. Stay with us, everybody.